Welcome back. You're watching To The Point. President Maithripala Sirisena of Sri Lanka has begun a 4-day state visit to India this morning. It's his first visit abroad, and it happens just 1 month after his dramatic election victory. After a prolonged period of tension under former President Rajapaksa, are India and Sri Lanka poised to open a new chapter in their relationship? All the signs point in that direction. With me to discuss this key relationship is former Foreign Secretary Lalit Mansingh, former Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs KC Singh, and the senior writer of India Today, Jyoti Malhotra. Mr. Mansingh, President Maithripala Sirisena has chosen India as his first foreign visit just a month after his surprise but dramatic election. After the tense relationship under former President Rajapaksa, how important is this visit for New Delhi?
Well, it's important because both India and Sri Lanka have to do a lot of course correction for some of the aberrations in the recent past. And I think the Rajapaksa government was veering too far away from India towards the Chinese embrace, which made Delhi uncomfortable. So I think it's in a sense reassuring India that we will have normal relations, but there are still a lot of very contentious issues that both sides have to deal with. Basically, India has to come to terms with the fact that you can't put Sri Lanka in a kind of Monroe doctrine and accept them as your legitimate strategic backyard. You have to treat them as a sovereign state, and
which they are.
Which they are. But we need to reiterate this and have a slightly different kind of relationship than in the past.
Mr. KC Singh, let's begin by exploring Sri Lanka's relationship with China, particularly as it developed under former President Rajapaksa. First of all, last year, the Indians were upset when 2 Chinese submarines docked at a Colombo port. Then we've discovered that over the years, 60% of the equipment that the Sri Lankan Air Force and Sri Lankan Army get are sourced from China. Thirdly, Hambantota Port and the proposed South Container Terminal in Colombo are being built by the Chinese. And finally, and for some perhaps most worryingly of all, Sri Lanka has agreed that of reclaimed land in Colombo harbour, some 88 hectares will be given on a 99-year lease to Colombo, but a further 20 hectares will be actually given freehold. How important and how necessary had it become for India to prize apart this growing linkage between Beijing and Colombo?
It was extremely important because I call this the first island chain of India, which is Maldives, Sri Lanka, and of course Andamans, which is with us. And we have to be sensitive to what happens here. And don't forget, 2611 came via the ocean. We have a huge ocean front, which opens up India to all kinds of incursions. And don't forget, the British came via the ocean. So ocean becomes an extremely important element in a security. And therefore, you have to have an extended friendly barrier, which doesn't mean, as Mr. Lalit Mansingh correctly said, that you want to colonize those countries, but there has to be a balance. They have to retain a certain balance, and I think this visit is the beginning of a rebalance. How much of a rebalance takes place would A, depend on us, and B, on President Sirisena.
You know, the problem with rebalancing is that you're actually not just rebalancing Delhi-Colombo, but you're effectively getting Colombo to rebalance Colombo-Beijing. Now, China is a great source of funds for Sri Lanka's development. Between 2005 and 2012, China gave some $4.7 billion of economic assistance. And from 2012 to today, they've committed a further $2.2 billion. That is something India can't compete with. We certainly can't replace China. So are we going to have to accept that no matter what rebalancing we manage, China will remain a critical economic partner for Colombo?
I think you're absolutely right, Karan. And this $7.5 billion approximately that the Chinese have lent to Sri Lanka, and I'd like to add at very low rates of interest. So essentially, and some of it is also that the former Rajapaksa government had given sovereign guarantees. So whether or not the new president, Maithripala Sirisena, likes it or not, I think they are very much in bed with the Chinese, and it will be very, very difficult for the Indians to extricate Sri Lanka out of that. Having said that...
Which is one reason why the promises or statements made by Vikramasinghe before he became Prime Minister that they would terminate the arrangement for Colombo Port actually hasn't happened, and now one of the President's spokesman is suggesting that in fact that will go ahead.
It will go ahead. It has to go ahead, not only because this Colombo port terminal is actually, it's a deep water facility, and it's been built by the Chinese, and it's also controlled by the Chinese. So when this Chinese nuclear submarine docked, in November last year when it docked in at this terminal. And of course the Chinese sort of said that, listen, it was just to sort of pick up supplies to go onwards into the Indian Ocean and to sort of fend off pirates, Somali pirates. But I don't think anybody's buying that. But just to quickly add, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going to Sri Lanka in March. And not only is he going to Sri Lanka, but he's going to the Maldives, Mauritius and Seychelles. So I think there is an Indian Ocean strategy that the Indian government is finally perhaps beginning to put together.
Coming back to Sri Lanka, if the relationship that Sri Lanka has with China was one problem that we needed to sort out and rebalance, another is of course the Tamil issue. Now President Sirisena has much more Tamil support than Rajapaksa, and his government has promised, although perhaps not begun to implement, a full implementation of 13th Amendment, even accepting 13th Amendment plus, and they've agreed to look into the question of war crimes and other atrocities against the Tamils. Are we in Delhi confident that we will see meaningful action, not just rhetoric on these issues?
Well, I think so, because not just because of Mr. Sirisena. Remember, he was very much part of the Rajapaksa policy on Tamils, and he's only has defected recently. So I think more reassuring is the presence of Ranil Wickremesinghe as the Prime Minister. And Ranil has been close to the Tamil community, the Tamils have a sense of confidence in his leadership. So I think they are going in the right direction. But
so Ranil's presence as Prime Minister gives us assurance on the Tamil issue?
Yes, because Rajapaksa's core constituency was the Sri Lanka right, the Buddhist right. And that still remains his core constituency. So he has to do some deft footwork there.
You know, Mr. K.C. Singh, the United Nations Human Rights Council session in Geneva is shortly going to get underway, and theoretically, Sri Lanka could face for the third year running an adverse resolution. But there are reports in papers like The Hindu today that the United States and India are trying to engineer either a postponement or at least a delay in passing any resolution because they believe it's important to give the new government time. If that succeeds, and one assumes it will it work to enhance the new president's attitude to India and make him more favorable to doing things we want him to do, particularly on the Tamil issue?
Look, even with Rajapaksa, we had not gone along with the earlier resolution. So we helped him 3-4 years ago. But that didn't seem to help as far as handling Sri Lanka was concerned. Yes, I think this will be one of the instruments which will be on the table in terms of how you deal with Sri Lanka. But I think you have to have a more positive engagement. Because after all, don't forget, Hambantota was offered to you. You didn't step in. So even if we cannot push the Chinese back in terms of their presence in Colombo, there are old proposals on Trincomalee, which is a natural port on the east coast. Do we want to go back there for storage, for oil storage or oil companies? So I think Sri Lanka has to be encouraged to balance India in a manner in terms of your footprint there, in terms of your security interests, and therefore also not suddenly submarines resurfacing at timings of China's choosing. That was, I think, really obtuse on the part of Rajapaksa. It was deliberate snub, so we can't buy this, that we are sorry, this is just a submarine.
Has the Tamil issue, Jyoti, been complicated by the fact that the new Tamil majority Northern Provincial Council passed a resolution just a couple of weeks ago actually calling for an international inquiry into genocide? And they did it after President Sirisena took over, and in completely ignoring the fact that he was reaching out to them, and they've effectively, as far as he's concerned, slapped him on the face.
Yes, it is complex, but I think you also have to understand that this new the recently elected Chief Minister of the Northern Province, and he is a TNA, a Tamil National Alliance sort of representative. There will be rebalancing, and I think what will be very interesting is how the new government in Sri Lanka, Maithripala Sirisena's government, how it implements the lessons of the LLRC, or the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission. Because as you know, Rajapaksa refused to implement those, although there were some 19 or 20 meetings between the TNA and his government. Both sides were blaming each other.
So that's a test for us and for him.
I think that's a test for both sides, but I think that's why his visit is interesting, because he's willing to implement the 13th plus amendment. I think he is willing. I think Sirisena is willing. And remember, Chandrika Kumaratunga is behind this alliance, and I think she's
as is Ranil.
as is Ranil, as Casey said, and they are all friends of India.
And one of the first steps was changing the governor there. He's put a civilian there and taken the military man out.
Yeah.
And that
I
again
think that
was a
was very,
reassuring sign.
very, very
That was one of the first
A
steps.
third issue that has bedeviled the relationship, although not at the same level of press attention, is this question of the repatriation of some 1 lakh Sri Lankan Tamil refugees in Tamil Nadu. Is this going to be easy to sort out? And what's the best solution? To find a way of sending them back, or give them Indian citizenship and keep them here?
No, I don't think there's option is to give them Indian citizenship. I don't think they're also anxious to stay on in India. In fact, they have been clamoring to go back. 1 or 2 committed suicide because they were not allowed to go back. So the way I think the two governments should discuss a phased manner in which they can go back to Sri Lanka. There are complications there. Their land may have been taken over and might have gone into adverse possession. They have lost their livelihood. So a lot needs to be done. But I think India can play a role by suggesting a phased repatriation and also adding to the economic package that we've been giving for the northern region in Sri Lanka.
To help them rehabilitate.
Absolutely.
And
We've
resume
done
life.
that with housing. We can do much more in that area.
A fourth issue, Mr. Casey Singh, is the perennial problem of fishermen. Now here, what perhaps Indian audiences don't realize is that it's Sri Lankan Tamil fishermen who actually object to Indian fishermen trespassing, as they call it, on their waters. Is this going to be something the two governments can sort out, or is this one problem that will remain a pinprick for many years?
No, as long as the maritime boundary is clear and there are GPS systems available nowadays, question is not whether it can be implemented, or very clearly you have a demarcation line.
But the
maybe
fishermen
greater
cross on purpose because the waters on the other side
Are
are
much
deeper,
richer.
the fish are richer,
fine, but I think
and more bountiful.
Yeah, so you need which means your Coast Guard has to be careful, not let them do it, and their Coast Guard and our Coast Guard has to work together. That's number one. Number two is not turn everything into a major incident, arrest them and their boats, and it becomes a bilateral matter. There should be a mechanism to quickly resolve it. Therefore, deter them from going there, maybe hold back the boat for a few days or whatever. But it has to be greater patrolling on both sides and cooperation, which we've had incidentally. While the LTT were there, there was greater intelligence exchanges between our Navy and the Sri Lankans.
You want
But
to
for that you have to tell the Tamil Nadu government
Exactly.
to tell her own fisher people that they cannot cross this maritime boundary into Sri Lanka. And which Tamil Nadu fisherman is going to listen, I'd like to know. Because right now that's not happening. The waters in Sri Lanka are much richer. They're fecund with fish. And the boats, and I think the unfortunate part is, Karan, is that the Indian fisher people have trawlers. You know, they scrape the bottom of the ocean.
Which the Sri Lankans don't.
Don't
That's another
want.
reason why they object, because our
Absolutely.
catch ends up being much bigger than theirs.
No, Karan,
Yes.
maybe there can be an arrangement on something being paid to them, an arrangement on fishing allowed in their waters if they're not doing it, and the Sri Lankan government charging a cess or something. Rather than doing that, do a kind of joint arrangement.
One other little item that's attracted a certain amount of press attention today, and it's taken me certainly by surprise, the two governments have decided they're going to sign a civil nuclear deal. Is that a serious thing, or is it just a way of assuring Sri Lanka that when and if you are interested in nuclear plants, we're there to help you?
I remember that in the 70s and 80s, whenever foreign dignitaries came here, we signed a cultural cooperation agreement. I think the civil nuclear deal is the new cultural cooperation agreement. It doesn't have much substance, but since you need an agreement to be signed, it is part of the ceremonial. I think this was the closest they could get. I don't think it's a very serious area of cooperation, but why not? You can sign it to any number of countries.
Now, you mentioned how the Prime Minister of India is going to be paying a return visit to Sri Lanka in the middle of March, and at that time he's going to in fact also go to Jaffna in the north. Would you accept that the future between India and Sri Lanka looks not just more comfortable, but much more amicable than the past?
Oh, absolutely. I think there is a new story. There is a new page. You know, we all talk in terms of cliches, but I think that you have to credit the Modi government for re-looking at India's maritime boundaries. You know, Casey said it earlier in the program, that India is naturally a maritime nation, but we don't tend to look at India like that. We look at our disputes with Pakistan or with Bangladesh and you know, sort of a land neighbors. But if you just invert the map of India, it would be interesting to see that the Indian Ocean is, well,
And
it
you're
is
saying
India's.
that in that new way of looking at India, the Prime Minister is giving Sri Lanka both the attention and the importance that perhaps earlier it hadn't got.
It hadn't got because it was always seen an extension of something or the other. There was always a problem within quotes because there was China's sort of overbearing presence on the east. But just to quickly add, the Chinese have also said that the Indian Ocean is not India's ocean.
Leave the Chinese out of this because we're not about the Indian Ocean actually either.
Okay.
Do you believe that in fact what you're seeing is going to lead to a fairly significantly different and a much more higher level engagement between the two countries over the next 5 years?
So let me begin with the civil nuclear one. I think it's an interesting thing to put on the table because we may have information and there's been talk of the Chinese stepping in. Now you don't want them to get into that area.
So we can't really leave China after
no, and secondly, Sri Lanka is an energy deficient country. And we have certainly advanced technology as far as heavy water pressurized reactors are concerned, and they are cheap. They're much cheaper than international reactors of the size.
So this is a good deal.
This is a good way. This is a good way to strategically get it.
But I think to push you along because we're out of time. So do you believe that this will be a stepping stone to a much bigger, wider relationship?
I think this is a point at which Sri Lanka domestically is rebalancing its politics, where presidential power, which had got overly centralized, is getting, and externally it is rebalancing. I think they are reaching out to India to say we need to rebalance. We are not at war with LTTE. The balance that we had then needs rebalance.
Let's leave it there. My thanks to all three of you for coming to studio, and there we end this particular episode.